People often ask me, where does success come from? From luck? From intelligence? Or from a perfect plan? No, success often comes to two kinds of people. One, the crazy ones. Two, the daring ones. The crazy act, even when the world laughs in their face. The daring fear nothing, because they would rather lose everything than live a mediocre life. You can be wise, but if you're not crazy, you won't dare to dream. If you're not daring, you won't dare to do. And today, I will tell you their story. One crazy person, one daring soul, and how they changed the world with the very things others called madness and foolishness. Chapter 1, A Strange Speech. 1.1, A Silent Hall. A speaker steps forward. In a large auditorium in the heart of the city, where stage lights poured down like rivers of silver in the dark, hundreds sat in complete silence. A strange hush spread across the room, as though every breath had been seized by some invisible instinct. People weren't here for a famous name, but for a mysterious promise whispered through flyers and social media. A talk that will make you question your life and the ideals you chase. No one knew exactly who the man stepping onto the stage was. All they had was that cryptic line, a talk that will make you question your life and the ideals you chase. Some exchanged glances, maybe entrepreneurs, maybe students, maybe broken spirits searching for something to believe in. There was no music, no host, just a curtain gently fluttering like a soul about to be revealed. Footsteps echoed. A silver-haired man in an old suit, his face lined with age, but eyes blazing, stepped forward. The soft thud of his leather shoes on the wooden stage echoed with eerie clarity, each step tapping into the minds of the audience. He didn't radiate authority, but something deeper, something that made people fall silent. And strangely, that silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something was about to ignite. He didn't bow, didn't begin with thanks. He simply said, success often comes to two types of people. One, the crazy. Two, the daring. The room held its breath. That line cut through layers of beliefs like a blade. In that instant, no one thought of paychecks, deadlines, or KPIs. They just looked at him and silently wondered, which one am I? Or have I never dared to be either? 1.2. Two kinds of people who seem least likely to succeed. The crazy are those who do things that make others shake their heads. They don't wait to be understood. They act before the world catches up. A faint chuckle arose somewhere, quickly swallowed. Those words, vague at first, cut deep into the hearts of those who had once been bold but gave up. The daring are those who take actions that, if wrong, would cost them everything. They're willing to bet, to lose, and also to win. His voice was low, not loud, but carried the weight of someone who had lived, lost, and triumphed. Not through talent alone, but through the courage to do what no one else dared. He looked directly into the crowd. You may be smart, careful, well-read. But if you're not crazy, you won't dare to dream. And if you're not daring, you won't dare to act. A young man swallowed hard. A middle-aged woman gripped her purse tighter. Deep inside, something stirred, a whisper from all the times they'd sat before an Excel sheet and said no to a dream because it was too risky. Then came a pause, and he said, instead of giving you theories, I'll tell you two stories. One about a crazy person, one about someone daring, and then about the miracle that happened when they met. He placed a hand on the podium, gaze drifting far into memory. I met them. I saw them. They didn't just succeed. They changed the world they stepped into. A chill ran down many spines. They didn't fully understand, but they knew. Something inside them was about to shift tonight. Not just knowledge, but the very shape of belief. And that was worth the wait. Chapter 2, The Madman, Men and the Dream of a City on the Sea. 2.1, The Science-Loving Kid Who Built Junk All Day. Men grew up in a working-class alley in District 8. A small, cracked house with rusty tin roofing, where the sound of rain was always louder than the TV. But to men, that place was a laboratory, a cramped space, heavy with the smell of burnt wires and childhood sweat, became the cradle of scientific dreams that rose like silent currents of electricity. Old plastic bottles turned into makeshift reactors. Bicycle tires became drive gears. The technological world in his mind was recreated using the very things others threw in the trash. While other kids flew kites or played soccer, men took apart old clocks, broken radios, discarded washing machines. Once, he even built a fan powered by a rechargeable solar battery. His mother scolded him harshly. "You're just breaking things. You're not building anything. Go study, boy." Min lowered his head, not because he was afraid, but because he knew she wasn't wrong. A woman who carried goods for a living, struggling to put 3 meals on the table, couldn't possibly understand why her son found joy in touching scrap. But deep inside, every wrongly wound copper wire, every broken chip, was a lesson far more valuable than any 11th grade math class. He didn't argue, but every night, he'd secretly switch on his flashlight and tinker in silence. His eyes would light up every time a bolt fit perfectly or when a spark flickered on a cracked circuit board. That spark wasn't just electricity. It was part of his soul, a knock from the future. Others might call it nonsense. But to Min, he was laying the first bricks for a city the world had yet to imagine. 2.2. The makes no sense gift at 17. In 11th grade for the school science fair, Min brought a strange model. A floating city on the sea, powered by solar energy, fresh water produced from condensation, and floating homes connected by energy bridges. The model was nearly 5 feet long, something Min built over 3 months. On rainy nights, he covered the control circuit with his jacket. The tiny solar panels, barely the size of thumbnails, were bought at Knotttown Market. He attached them one by one using tweezers and old phone glue. He wasn't just building a model, he was living in it. His classmates laughed out loud. "What is this? Aquaman City?" The laughter slammed into his dream like nails. But Min just smiled and nodded. He didn't blame them. You can't fault someone who's never dreamed for not understanding a dream. The judges frowned. Lacks feasibility. Unrealistic. They looked at numbers and limits. No one looked at the vision. No one asked, if it were feasible, would we dare to do it? Min said nothing. He just gazed at his model, crafted down to the smallest detail. He hadn't built it to win a prize. He built it because this dream had lived in his mind for over a year. Inside that model was a tiny rainwater harvesting system, carefully calculated using average evaporation rates in the Gulf of Thailand. There were plastic joints that looked like scraps, but Min had run hydrodynamic simulations on them. He didn't build it to compete. He built it because if he didn't, his heart would suffocate. At the end of the fair, only one person approached. Uncle Hoa, an old engineer who used to be friends with Min's father. "Kid, if they say you're mad, but you feel sane, keep going. Don't be afraid." Those words hit like a lightning bolt. Min knew he wasn't wrong. He was just a few years ahead of his time. So what if I'm early? He thought. The sun rises every day. It doesn't wait for applause. 2.3, dropping out and a vagabond life between makeshift labs. Min got into Polytechnic University, majoring in mechatronic engineering. But after just 3 semesters, he dropped out. He remembered that morning clearly. The professor walked in with outdated slides, teaching concepts Min had already tested and failed at back in 10th grade. There was no fire. The classroom was full of knowledge, but no soul. Friends were shocked. His family was devastated. His mother cried for 3 days straight. But Min knew, if he kept studying like this, the fire in him would die. Theories were great, but without touching the real world, passion would slowly wither. Every night after that decision, he'd stare at the ceiling, not in regret, but in fear. Fear that this world might crush him if he wasn't mad enough to keep going. But he did. He rented an abandoned warehouse in Thursday Duk and turned it into a makeshift lab. Ate instant noodles, slept in an old hammock, lived off-street repair gigs, and tutoring physics. But his floating city grew larger every day. Mornings, he fixed old appliances for neighbors. Afternoons, he tutored struggling students. Nights belonged to the dream. He built plastic pipelines, drew diagrams with markers on cloth scraps. And strangely, every time he did that, though his body was exhausted, he felt alive. Every time the electrical system ran smoothly. Every time a solar panel store charged, Min would grin like a kid getting a red envelope on New Year's Day. No one believed in him. No one invested. No one supported him. But Min kept going because he was mad, and he was happy to be. Maybe the world would forget him, but he would never forget himself. And maybe that was the first true definition of success. Chapter 3. The Daredevil, Han, and the Gamble with No Way Back. 3.1. The law student who dropped out in her third year. Han was the youngest daughter of a family with 3 generations of civil servants in Hugh. She was expected to become a judge. Smart, high-achieving, well-behaved, the model child and student. Since childhood, Han had lived in an old moss-covered house, where every dinner was filled with stories about right, wrong, law, justice. Her father, a retired prosecutor, read legal newspapers every morning. Her mother, a retired government official, always reminded her, "You must live by standards, and standards are not up for negotiation." But one day, during an internship at the District 1 court, she witnessed a simple hearing. A poor woman had her small house confiscated for a 28 million VNE debt to the bank. The woman was illiterate, couldn't understand the contract, didn't know how to appeal. She just cried. That look in her eyes, red, not angry, not pleading but utterly hollow. Han stood behind, holding her internship documents, frozen as if she had just witnessed a courtroom with no winners. She wasn't angry, but realized something. A massive legal system was functioning by procedure, while the human beings within it were silently fading away. The legal articles she had studied for 3 years suddenly felt invisible in reality. She asked herself, if justice is a scale, who holds it? If the illiterate cannot read a contract, then who writes the contract? That night, she submitted her resignation from university. Her family was so furious they disowned her. But Han knew, if she kept studying, all she'd ever write was reports. She cried, not out of fear of being cast out, but because for the first time, she couldn't be the good daughter. And for the first time, she understood what it meant to live for herself. 3.2. Starting a business from zero, selling everything to build a social enterprise. Han arrived in Saigon with 30 million VND after selling her laptop, motorbike, even her keepsake necklace. She launched a project called Clean Water for Every Home, aiming to create compact, cheap, easy-to-install water purifiers for places without electricity or clinics. Her first office? A 12-square-meter rented room in GoVap. Low ceiling, moldy walls, stuck windows. But inside that tiny space was a sky full of what-ifs and how-to. She taped maps of provinces lacking clean water on the wall, hand-drew filtration system diagrams, printed out chemical formulas on A4 paper, and self-studied how to read bacterial water charts. No one believed her. No one invested. Many called her that crazy girl. The press was too busy writing about AI startups. No one wrote about her. People laughed when they saw her pitching at startup events, armed only with a plastic model and a map of contaminated water. No flashy PowerPoints. No 3D prototypes. Just eyes that ached when seeing a child drink murky water. But Han didn't give up. She and 2 young engineers traveled to the Mekong Delta, testing devices in Tra Vinh, Bac Lu, and John. Every successful trial, she documented feedback, took photos, and compiled reports. She shared meals with villagers, slept in local homes, woke early to ride boats and collect water samples. Once, a water cobra chased them at a swamp. They had to climb a tree to escape. But she laughed because she knew what she was building wasn't a product. It was hope. She had no money, but she had guts and an unshakable ideal. The guts to step off the safe path. The guts to stand firm against a world chasing silicon and million-dollar startups. Her ideal, clean water, shouldn't be a luxury. It's a basic human right. And to her, once you believe, you must go all the way. 3.3. A call from an African nation. At 26, while working near the How River, Han received an email from Kenya. An NGO invited her to test her device there. The email had only a few lines, but made her heart pound. We heard about your low-cost purifier. We'd love to test it in our villages. She printed it, taped it to her locker, a tiny certificate that the world had started to listen. She flew out with just 4 purifiers, a notebook, and a sleeping bag. No luxury luggage, no business visa. She walked through Nairobi airport with an old backpack and the shoes that had waded through rice paddies in Vietnam. Each step into the unknown, maybe, just maybe, would lead someone to believe in her. There, she lived in a village with only 4 hours of electricity a day. She had to pump water by hand, taught locals how to use the devices, and waited for feedback. Each day, she wrote journals, filmed progress, and analyzed bacteria levels. She ate food cooked on wood fires, learned basic Swahili to communicate, and slowly became one of the villagers. She told stories of Vietnam. They shared tales of drought. All anyone wanted was a drop of clean water. And then, the system worked. Villagers got clean water. Children grew healthier. Her mother called her for the first time in 3 years. "Are you doing okay?" A simple question, but Han broke down in tears. She knew her mom wasn't no longer angry, but had understood. Not because her daughter followed a strange path, but because she had chosen not to turn back. Han smiled. She knew she had taken a gamble, and she was right, because sometimes only a dare can light the path that reason is too afraid to walk. Chapter 4. The Intersection, when the madman met the daredevil. 4.1. The Startup Seminar, where 2 paths crossed. The seminar, Breakthrough Thinking, Starting from the Dark Side, was held in a small conference center in District 2, Saigon. No dazzling lights, no famous MCs, no grand live streams. Yet the room was packed because word had spread. Some crazy folks are going to speak there. Men came because of an invitation from an old friend, an engineer who once collaborated with him on a community project. Han was invited by the organizers after her article on clean water for every home had quietly gone viral in sustainable development circles. They sat at opposite ends of the hall, unaware of each other's presence. But when each of them took the stage to speak, both listened attentively, as if for the first time, they were hearing a fragment of their own soul speaking aloud. Men stood under the white lights, holding a model of a floating city made from recycled mica and aluminum. He presented as if telling a dream, and though no one had invested in that dream, no fund had yet recognized it, his eyes still gleamed like the first time he saw sparks rise from a salvaged circuit board. Han didn't use slides. She simply held a thick notebook, open page by page, pointing to pictures of Kenyan children laughing beside clear basins of water. Each number, each chart, each water test sample was living proof of a life wagered. During the break, men approached and smiled. That's not just an invention. That's your heart turned into a device, isn't it? Han looked up, carefully studying the young man in a worn-out shirt, his eyes sparkling. And you're not building a city. You're creating a whole new world. From that moment, they began talking, and they never stopped. For point 2, coffee sessions like global research councils. They met every weekend at a small coffee shop tucked in an alley on Nguyen Tri Phuong Street. Round table, bare brick walls, warm yellow light. The place slowly transformed into a peculiar creative hub. Men brought improved models. Han brought new research. They exchanged ideas like top-tier experts, but laughed like 2 kids building Lego sets. They didn't just talk about engineering. They talked about the world, about places where people needed madness to survive and needed daredevils to have hope. One time, men asked, "What if I integrate your water purification system into the floating city model?" Han thought for a few seconds, then nodded. "And what if I test your mini solar bridge system in electricity-deprived villages in Kenya?" They both laughed, and from that handshake, they stepped into a new chapter together. 4.3. A crazy and dangerous alliance. Project Oasis. They called it Oasis, a pilot floating city with an integrated water filtration system, fully renewable energy, and the capacity to self-produce food via hydroponic farming. No one funded them, no one believed, but they had each other, and they had a team. Han rallied volunteer students from environmental clubs, then called back wandering engineers he'd once worked with. They rented a barren coastal land near Phan Thiet, where the sun blazed and salty soil couldn't grow a single vegetable. There, men drove stakes and built the floating frames. Han installed the primary water purification system. They lived among mosquitoes, sand, and sea breeze. Yet they laughed, kept building, kept debating under flashlights at night. The project failed again and again. First time, the power system couldn't handle the load. Second time, green algae clogged the pipes. Third time, a storm broke 3 connector bridges. But no one gave up. Each failure became a memo. Each scar a merit badge and the blueprint of those who refused to surrender. Chapter 5. Stepping out of the shadows when the world began to see them. 5.1. An unknown journalist, a fateful article. One scorching afternoon, Min was wiping salt off a circuit board while Han was busy adjusting the water filtration system. A young woman entered their test site with a small camera and a notebook. I'm Min, Thursday, a journalism student. I found the Oasis project through an old forum. I'd like to write an article, not for a major newspaper, just for my personal blog. They smiled and nodded. They were used to people coming, then leaving, used to telling their story, only to be met with disbelief. But this time was different. 3 days later, the article appeared on a blog dedicated to human-centered technology. The title was simple. They call themselves the Madman and the Daredevil, and they're building a whole new world from salt and sand. The article quietly spread, first among student tech groups, then on environmental forums. Eventually, a young entrepreneur in Singapore stumbled upon it while searching for inspiration for a sustainable investment fund. An email was sent, and Han's phone received its first international call. We want to meet you too, not for an interview, but to invest. 5.2. Their first meeting room, no PowerPoint, just passion. The meeting was held at a modern office in Singapore. Min wore borrowed shoes, his shirt still stained with ink. Han brought a backpack full of documents, no blazer, no makeup. In the sleek conference room, investors sat across a glass table. They remained silent for the first 30 minutes, not out of disinterest, but astonishment. They had never seen anyone pitch a project with paper models, phone-recorded clips, a voice burning with fire, and tears when recounting a Kenyan child who had coughed for a month from drinking dirty water. When Min spoke about DIY solar panels, and Han presented the chemical maps of polluted water sources, no one interrupted. But at the end, the head of the fund said just one sentence. We used to invest in technology, but today we're investing in 2 people. A $150,000 pilot funding agreement was signed, but neither of them stayed at a 5-star hotel. Min and Han returned to their budget guest house near the Eastern bus station, shared a box of rice, and laughed. Still mad as ever, and still daring like we've never fallen. 5.3. Oasis version 2, and the first time the media got their names right. The Oasis project was rebuilt, this time with a budget, an international technical team, and environmental consultants flown in from Europe. Min redesigned the floating frames using composite instead of aluminum. Han coordinated the integration of an online learning system for children living on the model island. 3 months later, Oasis version 2.0 was complete. National television covered it. A Korean TV crew came to film a documentary. For the first time, they were correctly introduced. Min, the mad engineer building the first floating city in Southeast Asia. Han, the fearless woman bringing clean water to every corner of the planet. But when asked how he felt, Min just smiled. I don't need to be called a hero. We're just 2 people who don't want to step back. Chapter 6. The Storm, when everything nearly collapsed. 6.1. The first incident, sea storms and lessons from nature. Oasis 2.0 began testing on an artificial island near Kongyo. Everything started smoothly. The water filtration system ran steadily, and solar panels provided enough energy to power an entire cluster of floating houses. Children there had their first lesson on a screen powered by solar electricity. The first smile of a child as they turned on the clean water tap. That was the silent gift Min and Han carried in their hearts. No media coverage, no up, just that tiny enough to make all the sleepless nights worthwhile. But only 2 weeks later, a powerful storm struck. Winds of level 10 tore through, Waves smashed the equipment. Water flooded the battery compartments. A bridge made of composite plastic snapped, and several floating modules drifted away. On the rudimentary radar screen in their coordination container, swirling red and purple lines approached like a monster devouring the freshly sprouted dream. Min and the technical team stayed up all night. They pulled anchors by hand, shielded generators with raincoats. Han contacted local authorities while personally retrieving broken parts, even as her foot bled from stepping on glass shards. Through the howling winds and crashing waves, Min's eyes scanned relentlessly across circuit boards and water pipes. Every pop from a blown capacitor was a skipped heartbeat in his chest. But no one backed down. They looked at each other and pressed on, as if even the storm had to envy their absurd resilience. At dawn, they sat on the shore, drenched and disheveled, staring at Oasis like a wrecked ship smashed by waves. "I thought we were finally okay," Min said, gripping a broken solar cell. "We were okay until we were tested," Han replied, lips pale with cold. That simple line, soft as breath, resonated like a carved-in-stone lesson. In their eyes, there was no light of success left, only the warm ember of something deeper than promises, the will to continue, even if it meant breaking apart. 6.2. An investor pulls out. Faith begins to falter. News of the storm and the damage reached the press. A few articles questioned the sustainability of Oasis. A secondary investor in their funding group pulled out, leaving a cold email. "The project isn't ready for real-world conditions. We can't continue supporting it." That phrase, "can't," didn't just pull funding. It carved a slow-dripping hole in the already fragile net of faith they'd cast across this sea. The message arrived at 2 a.m. Han read it, her chest tightening. Min said nothing, just picked up a pencil and began redesigning a wave-resistant module. Thicker this time, more flexible, anchored like an octopus. No complaints, just the sound of a pencil scratching across new plans. Each line a fresh scar etched into their minds. But the hardest part wasn't losing the money. It was keeping the team's fire alive. One young engineer resigned, leaving a farewell email. "I believe in the vision, but I'm not sure I can keep living with constant failure." That sentence sliced through the tether, tying them to the ordinary world. Vision, no matter how beautiful, needs companions. And that silent fatigue was spreading like a spiritual virus. Han sat alone in a dark room, staring at a dwindling budget, barely 40 million dong left. She didn't cry, but for the first time, she wrote in her journal, "Am I dragging everyone into a reckless dream that means nothing?" There was no answer, but the very act of asking, that was the sign she still believed. Believed enough to question, believed enough to hurt. 6.3, a silent moment, and a reason to continue. Amid the chaos, a handwritten letter arrived from a small village in Kenya, where Han had installed the very first unit. The letter was scrawled with childlike handwriting. The first line read, "Dear Han, we have clean water every day now. Thank you." At the end was a pencil drawing by a child, a girl holding a small device near a well, villagers clapping behind her. Just one letter. But in that moment, every reason shattered and was reborn. No need for million-dollar funds. No need for patents. Just one source of clean water and hands clapping gently together. That was enough. Min read the letter in silence, then taped it next to the latest design draft. "I don't risk everything for money. I risk it so I'll never have to say, I could have made it happen. And I'm not mad because I don't know how to calculate. I'm mad because I can see what doesn't exist yet, and I believe it can." Min's words didn't ring out like a declaration. They landed like a silent vow, a commitment needing no signature, just the will to keep standing. The next morning, they returned to the field. Solar cells were laid back out under the sun, water filters cleaned and reassembled, and a new message was written on the floating house wall in black marker. "If we don't back down, even the storm will have to move on." And in the glimmer of dawn, they began again. No fireworks, no live streams, just a stubborn belief that in the middle of the ocean, it was still possible to build a floating city. not just with tech, but with hearts that refuse to go dark.
Chapter 7. Synergy when the mad and the bold became symbols. 7.1. Oasis 3.0. A community begins to form. After the near collapse, the project didn't die. On the contrary, it came back stronger than ever. Min and Han, together with their team, spent nearly 3 months redesigning the entire Oasis system. 3 months without a single day off, with no distinction between day or night. In a small borrowed room behind a house in Kongyo, they spread out blueprints on the floor, discussed until their voices went hoarse, debated until exhaustion. Han often sat motionless next to the model, eyes sunken from lack of sleep, still flipping through each technical page. Min used the storm's experience to simulate even harsher scenarios, trying to prove that if Oasis could survive that storm, it could survive the future. Now, it was no longer a prototype. It was an open platform. Anyone could contribute, modify, expand the floating house designs, energy systems, and water purification tech. They kept no intellectual property rights. In fact, they hosted live streams teaching villagers how to 3D print components, fix basic errors with local materials, or install solar panels with the simplest tools. They called it Oasis 3.0, an open ecosystem coded in open source on GitHub, with technical documents in both Vietnamese and English, and how-to videos recorded by local people from the Mekong Delta. A community started to form, not from the city center, but from the Forgotten Lands. From just 5 floating clusters in Kongyo, after 6 months, Oasis had reached a coastal cluster in Ninh Thuan, serving 34 fishing households. A cluster in the Mekong Delta, used as a floating school during flood season. A cluster in Lai Sun Island, turning salt water into fresh water for farming. Every installation, Min and Han went along, not to supervise, but to listen. They shared meals with locals, built the floating houses under the blazing sun, and sat around campfires at night, hearing stories of droughts, floods sweeping away children's school books, and 100-meter deep wells still reeking of iron. At each site, they left behind not just machines, but maintenance manuals and community groups for self-sustainability. Min said, if technology doesn't come from the people and belong to the people, it won't last. Gradually, even the skeptics became instructors to neighboring villages. Oasis was no longer a project. It was a movement. 7.2. An invitation from the Global Startup Forum. In November that year, Han received an email from the Global Startup Forum, GSF, inviting her to speak as a guest alongside representatives from the US, Japan, and Sweden, countries renowned for clean technology. At first, she declined. She told Min, "We're not stars, just 2 people wrestling with dirty water, sea winds, screws, and sand." But Min smiled, patted her shoulder. "That's exactly why we need to go." So they see, changing the world doesn't require suits or flashy PowerPoint slides. So they agreed. At the talk, Min wore an old white shirt and faded jeans. Han brought a sample water filter, drew water from a murky glass, and filtered it live on stage. When clean drops trickled into a cup, the entire hall fell silent. Then, the applause roared on endlessly. Earlier, organizers had suggested they rehearse in advance for safety, but Min declined. He said, "If it fails, I want people to see the truth. And if it works, then it's not just about technique, but trust." A Japanese journalist wrote, "They don't talk about startups, they live in them." And they made me believe, if such people exist, humanity still has hope. 7.3. A symbol of a new generation. No permission needed. After the speech, local media started picking up on the once-forgotten story. 2 misfits in their journey to turn salt water into sweet hope. The mad and the bold, Vietnam's underground startup icons. Startup not to get rich, but so no one is left behind. People started using Oasis style to refer to daring, hands-on, field-driven projects, not desk-bound dreams in air-conditioned rooms. Some universities invited Min and Han to speak to students, but they turned down grand auditoriums. They chose small classrooms, sat on the floor, spoke with no mic. about failure, storms, cold investor emails, and nights surviving on leftover rice and tap water. But for Min and Han, fame wasn't the reward. It was the day they returned to Travin, where they'd first installed the system. A little girl ran up, hugging Han's leg, whispering, "Miss, my dad says since we got clean water, my mom doesn't cough anymore." Min stood beside them, quietly turned away, eyes misty. Not because they were praised, but because Min's madness and Han's boldness had become real hope for someone. And in that little girl's eyes, they were no longer misfits. They were the reason a family could sleep peacefully each night. Chapter 8. The Mad and the Bold, Those Who Never Step Back. 8.1. New Challenges and the Return of Fear. Oasis 3.0 was a resounding success. But with every step forward, a shadow always followed. When they began expanding the system to central Vietnam, a region of harsh weather, salty seas, and constant storms, the devices started encountering problems. Solar panels cracked under strong winds, and the water filters couldn't withstand the fine sand that seeped into every crevice. Some people started criticizing amateur tech, yet they dare test it in the field. So-called innovation using poor people as guinea pigs. Even foreign countries haven't pulled this off after decades. Stop dreaming. One night, Han sat alone on the wooden floor of a floating cluster in Phu Yen. She stared out at the pitch-black sea, her phone showing low battery, weak signal, and her spirit equally drained. Min sat beside her and handed her a cup of cold ginger tea. As long as we're still being cursed at, it means we're doing something no one else has done. Han gave a faint smile, but just then, an elderly local walked over, placed a bundle of sesame rice crackers on the table, and said, "I don't understand any of that fancy stuff, but the kids don't get diarrhea anymore. That's good enough. You too, keep it up." Han's eyes welled with tears again. She remembered, every step the mad and the bold take is never for themselves. It's for those who have no voice. 8.2. An offer from the government and a tough decision. At the end of that year, they receive an invitation from the Ministry of Science and Technology, a contract worth over 12 billion VND, funding to scale the Oasis model nationwide. It sounded like good news, but there was one clause. All patents, technical documents, and designs had to be handed over to a state-run unit for centralized management. Min gave a bitter smile. So basically, we give up the baby we birthed in exchange for money to raise it. Han stayed silent for 3 days, then stood before the team and said, "We're not doing this for money. We're doing this to bring tech to the poor, not to turn it into property for office bureaucrats." They rejected the deal. The media smeared them. Reckless startup founders, rejecting government support to chase clout, overestimating themselves. But they didn't back down, because the mad don't back down just because the world calls them fools. And the bold don't back down when they know what they're doing is right. 8.3. Night Classes and a Generation to Inherit. The following year, Min and Han launched a series of free training sessions for youth in remote areas, teaching how to build Oasis systems from recycled materials, utilize old tech, and apply open-source design. They didn't teach to recruit employees. They taught to raise successors. At a night class in SOC Trang, Min stood before a whiteboard full of technical diagrams and turned to ask, "Who here has ever thought they were too dumb to become an engineer?" More than half the class raised their hands. Me too. And now I'm the one teaching you. Han, meanwhile, brought each child up to a mini water purification model, letting them assemble it by hand, test for bacteria themselves, and then said, "Once you know how to make clean water, you're stronger than half the world already." Those classes had no certificates, no air conditioning, no 5-star restrooms. But they had the glow of oil lamps, eyes shining with curiosity, and dreams that for the first time were allowed to begin blooming. Chapter 9. The Inherited Flame, When Madness and Boldness Became a Generation's Choice. 9.1. When the mad and the bold became symbols. No one knew when it began, but in some remote schools, scribbled notes began appearing on bulletin boards. "I'm not smart, but I'll be bold like Sister Han. I've got no money, but I'll build things like Brother Min." The mad, the bold, are the ones who never step back. Their names started showing up in student essays, reading comprehension tests, and themed classroom discussions. They weren't featured on mainstream television, but on TikTok, Facebook, and independent blogs, short clips went viral. Han teaching with a wooden board, men disassembling an old machine and grinning like morning sunshine when he got it to work again. A group of students in Kano formed the Mad and Bold Lab Club. In Lao Kai, a middle school teacher guided his class in making mini water purifiers from plastic bottles using the Oasis model. And then the questions started echoing everywhere. Why doesn't our school teach stuff like this? Why aren't we allowed to take risks? Why is doing something different always called crazy? Han and Min realized they were no longer just the product of their own choices. They had become the excuse for an entire generation to break the mold. 9.2. The Return, and words that didn't need saying. 10 years after that strange speech in Chapter 1, Min returned to the narrow alley in District 8. The shabby house from his childhood had become a modest, tidy home. Not thanks to Min's success, but thanks to his mother's changed perspective. She once scolded him, called him crazy, and cried when he dropped out of university. But now, she cooked meals for the volunteers in Min's team whenever they came to fix machines or install electricity for locals. She didn't apologize. She didn't praise him either. She simply added a bit more tofu to his bowl and said, "Yesterday, the neighbor's kid said he wanted to learn like you. I told him to give it a try. It's okay to be a little crazy." Min smiled, bowed his head, and for the first time in over a decade, his tears weren't from loneliness, but from being understood. 9.3. The day Han took the stage. Saigon, a major conference. Han stood on stage, facing hundreds, from CEOs and scientists to high school students. She wore a simple white AO dye, her hair neatly tied back, no elaborate makeup. And she began her speech with the exact words spoken by that mysterious speaker years ago. Success usually comes to two kinds of people. 1, the mad. 2, the bold. The entire hall fell silent. Some had heard those words before. Others were hearing them for the first time. But every eye was locked on her. She spoke about filtering water by hand, about sleeping on rough beds in Africa, about children who called her the clean water sister. Then she said, "We're not better than anyone. We just don't know how to be afraid. We just don't know how to stop." She paused, glanced around, then closed with a calm yet resolute voice. If you've ever been called crazy, maybe you're on the right path. If you've ever been told you're reckless, maybe you're the only one truly living. The audience rose in a standing ovation, not for the speech, but for the part of themselves that once dared to be mad, once dared to be bold. But it stopped halfway, to be continued in Chapter 10. The ones who never step back, they're no longer just two. Chapter 10. The ones who never step back, they are no longer just two. 10.1. One nation, one generation, and the choice to never step back. That year, a group of high school students in Kontum decided to build a solar power system for a village that had never known light. They knew nothing about engineering, but they had read about Min. They studied every video he posted, every open-source blueprint he uploaded to his personal site. Then, one night, a single LED light flickered on in the middle of the village. The entire village applauded, and the kids cried. Meanwhile, in Bentray, a group of education students stood up against the outdated practice of making first graders memorize like machines. Inspired by Han's water purification project, they created a new curriculum, learning through play, through trees, through water. Their proposal was rejected by the ministry, so they sent it again, this time with pilot results from 3 rural classrooms. This time, people were forced to pay attention. From 2 individuals, once mocked as crazy and reckless, the flame had now spread. No one gave orders. No one led the way. But thousands, young and old, quietly followed. Because they realized, if madness means daring to hold onto your dreams, if boldness means daring to pursue them, then not being mad, not being bold, is simply living without ever truly living. 10.2. When the government asked, "Where are the youth heading?" a national survey stirred surprise. Over 60% of young people aged 18 to 30 chose taking risks, doing what's never been done, and creating social value over stability, secure jobs, or high income. Government agencies scrambled. Meetings followed. The headline screamed, Gen Z, the digital age's madmen? When startups are no longer tech, but a way of life. From rural provinces to big cities, a no-step-back movement began forming. No headquarters, no formal organization, just a shared spirit. Do it. Fix it if it fails. But don't just stand still and die slowly. A young parliament member stood up during a full assembly session and said, "We can stop young people from rebelling, but can we stop them from awakening?" No one answered, because everyone in the room knew that question wasn't for the government. It was for every adult, every parent, every teacher, every leader who had ever killed a dreamer with criticism, ever extinguished a risk-taker with fear. Chapter 12. The Reverse Wave, When the World Learned from Vietnam. 12.1. When Harvard opened a course called Eastern Rebellious Thinking. One day in March, in a lecture hall at Harvard University, during the course Innovation in Emerging Societies, Professor Annabelle C. Chan began with these words. You may know Elon Musk, but today we'll talk about Min, a young Vietnamese man who dropped out of college to build a floating city, and Han, a girl who quit law school to make clean water from bamboo. The class chuckled, but they quickly fell silent while watching videos of dare camps, the clean water village in Kenya and Min Bay City. After the session, an American student asked, how do they manage all this with no capital, no policy support? Professor Chan simply smiled, because they had something most of you don't yet have, the guts to do something crazy when no one stands with you. From that point, Harvard officially included a new course in the curriculum, Disruptive Resilience, the Crazy and the Brave in the Global South. 12.2. When the G7 looked to a Southeast Asian country to learn strategic madness. At a G7 summit held in Kyoto, Japan, for the first time, a Vietnamese representative was invited to speak at the Grassroots Social Innovation session. That person was not a minister or a PhD holder. It was Han, the founder of Dare Camps. She showed up in a plain white t-shirt and faded jeans, speaking English with a distinct Hue accent. Being crazy doesn't mean destroying everything. Being crazy is believing in something no one else sees. Taking risks isn't suicide. It's having the courage to live by what you believe in, even before the world acknowledges it. Her 12-minute speech was shared tens of millions of times. BBC headlined, Vietnam's Woman Who Redefined Madness. 12.3. When global organizations try to launch their own dare camps. UNICEF, UNESCO, and UNDP collaborated for the first time to launch a program named Global Dare Camps, modeled after Vietnam's original dare camp. Min, now the chief advisor, didn't lead the operations, but he sent a message printed on the entrance gate of every camp. No one is born to change the world, but anyone can choose to be a little crazy, a little daring, to do what no one else will. One by one, these camps sprang up in Brazil, Ethiopia, India, and Eastern Europe. And something remarkable happened. The poorest places, the conflict zones, the forgotten regions, were where the model flourished most, because their people had nothing left to lose. And sometimes all it takes is one spark to ignite a whole forest of hope. 12.4. A photograph that traveled the world. The photo was taken in a quiet corner of Min Bay. A local girl sitting in a floating classroom, holding a book that read, I'm not afraid of being poor. I'm only afraid of living without ever trying to be crazy. The photo spread like a global message. It became a symbol of a new generation, not waiting for others to change the world, but becoming the change themselves. If you've read this far, perhaps there's a bit of crazy in you too, or at least a time when you long to take a bold risk. Life doesn't reward hesitation, but it always rewards those who dare to step beyond their limits. The crazy and the brave, those who never step back, is not a story meant to end. It is the door for you to begin your own. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next video or story chapter. This journey is just beginning, And you, yes, you, will be the main character in the next part.